So this is Derek Smith with Farscapian, and that is spelled Farscapian, and his website is farscapian.com. He is an independent FOSS developer. He accepts tips via Lightning Invoice, so make note of that. He has an active project right now called Satoshi Spirits, and that's spirits as in liquors and alcohol.
Yeah.
He'll tell you more about that. And that project was created with Sovereign Stack. Sovereign Stack is an open source it's open source where you can deploy, manage your self-hosted Bitcoin-only website. So this kind of echoes a little bit, tags nicely with what Parker was talking about.
Yep.
All right. Well, here is Derek and Derek is from St. Augustine, Florida, which if you've never been, it's a really great place. So I encourage you the next time you're on the East Coast, northeast coast.
Just below Jacksonville.
Just below Jackson Hole. It's a great place.
Jacksonville.
Jackson Hole. What am I thinking? Jacksonville. Yeah, totally two different places. Anyway, Derek, take it away.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for those technical problems, but we'll get started. I'm presenting Sovereign Stack today, and this project allows you to create self-hosted, Bitcoin-only, value-for-value websites. Now, she mentioned my website is farscapian.com. A long time ago, there was a show called Farscape on Sci-Fi, and I was really into that when I was in high school, and I kind of just assumed that as my internet moniker, so I go on by Farscapian on Twitter and everything else. So, okay, so if you look at my website, farscapian.com/PLSD, the slides will be up there. You can also see my qualifications and contact information up there. And as was mentioned, I accept tips, so you can go to tip.farscapian.com, or if you prefer dollars, you can use tipUSD. And again, this is sovereignstack.org. I've designed these slides to kind of follow the website. So if you want to bring up sovereign-stack.org on your phone, you can kind of follow along. It's a document or a kind of a, well, I'll get into that. So Sovereign Stack, if you go to the About page, I try to narrow everything down and just one short blog article on the About. But essentially Sovereign Stack, it's a complete network solution that allows you to deploy value-for-value websites. It's software and the website, which documents everything. The software is all bash scripts. There's a lot of other things involved here, but everything starts with bash. Sovereign Stack started out as a BTC Pay server plus Ghost integration, so that might be of interest to Parker over there. I noticed his domain name was bitcoiner@ghost.io, but of course you generally want to see your own domain name there, and that's one thing that Sovereign Stack helps you achieve. There's another component which I will defer to Damien later, but I'm calling it Clam Server, and it's a mechanism that allows you to accept Bolt 12 prisms on your websites. But again, Damien will talk more about that. Sovereign Stack, you can deploy Ghost, Nextcloud, Gitti, and Nostr relays. And I'll get more into that, but under each website that you deploy, you can have a Nostr relay there, and it's whitelisted for a single pub key. So it's not an open relay, it's just for your identity, your website identity. Now, Sovereign Stack, there's a lot of ways to kind of explain it. I've been working on this project for about 5 years. The first couple years, I would say, were like learning how to code. In the last 3 years, I've been working, trying to get this developed. So it is a major effort on my part. I quit my job in 2018 to work on it full time. So I do like to explain it as there's a concept called infrastructure as code. I also like to explain Sovereign Stack is a software-defined data center. You can look all these concepts up separately. But essentially all these bash scripts are automating all of the aspects around server deployment, backups, restorations, automations. So Parker mentioned the difficulty involved with running your own server, and he's absolutely right, it's very difficult. But I think the point of Sovereign Stack, or at least my hope, is that it lowers the barriers to operating your own value for value websites. And of course, that means self-hosting. And that goes back to why I asked that question regarding Lightning and custodial. My view is that Lightning is inherently custodial, and if you want a non-custodial solution, thou shalt run your own server. Okay, so here is the general architecture. I did mention it's a complete network solution, and so I explain on the website how you can configure your network and what are the requirements involved. But essentially, what you have is a management machine. This would be your developer user-facing machine. And then you deploy one or more cluster hosts at home, where all my websites are running. They're just running on a NUC-style computer, x64. This is a cluster solution, so you can scale out horizontally per data center, and then you can add multiple data centers if you want to scale your deployment. It does require like a firewall that gets assigned a public IP address. And I explain in the website how to configure and switch your modem to do all of these cool things. Lastly, you need a VLAN capable managed switch. Okay, so I list some requirements here. I mentioned all of the hardware requirements. Both your management machine, the user-facing management machine, and your cluster nodes need to be able to support full Type 1 hardware virtualization. Everything runs in VMs. You need a fast and reliable internet connection if you're going to expose your websites to the public. You can use Sovereign Stack to create intranet websites. So let's say Pleb Lab, they could create a website that was integrated with this, and you don't need to expose it on the internet. And it uses SSH for remote administration and the virtual machines. Now there's several users that I like to point out. It helps describe various aspects of the documentation. The system owner and the system administrator I kind of see as the same person, because this is custodial. If you have access to the machine, you are the owner of the Bitcoin, essentially. You have a trusted mobile user. So in my case, on my own home, I have a WireGuard profile, and I can VPN into my my network and manage all my websites that way. You have local website users. So if you have an intranet website, your local website users would be those devices that are on your Wi-Fi network, for example, as opposed to a public website user that is coming in from the internet. The design philosophy on Sovereign Stack basically is I wanted to minimize trusted third parties as much as possible. So I have achieved that, I think. Once you have deployed your software, it doesn't rely on any third party for operation. Now, when you're deploying it for the first time, you have to download images, and it relies on Docker and a bunch of other infrastructure, LXD. But all of those things can be downloaded separately, and you can use this in a non-third-party type of way. So the software supports multi-tenancy. Typically, that's what the enterprise, they like to say, multi-tenancy. But in the case of Sovereign Stack, you're an individual. You should be running it as an individual. You can use it. You can use the multi-tenancy part to create multiple projects all on the same hardware. So that's pretty cool. You can have a public website and an internal website, and they would be completely isolated from each other. And I also try to avoid the use of email, exchange rate providers. So you'll notice my websites, when we look at them here in a minute, are all Satoshi based, and with the exception of TipUSD. It does rely on the public DNS, which is censorship prone, so that's one area that needs some work, but I'm kind of keeping an eye on for DNS alternatives. Okay, what is a deployment? This is kind of like the primary baseline. I'll show you a picture in a minute, but it's like your unit of deployment. And a deployment is fully contained within an LXC project. I'll get into that a bit more. Let me preface this. There's a lot of technology in this Sovereign Stack that probably many people haven't heard of before. It's mostly in the infrastructure as code space and networking, and my background is in networking primarily. I use ZFS, if anyone is familiar with that. Okay, so this is what a deployment looks like. At the bottom, we have our bare metal management machine. We're talking about a cluster host here. And when you reach out to that machine and take it under management, it installs LXD. LXD is like a cloud provider. So it allows you to spin up VMs, create logical networks, manage your storage. And so I'm using LXD, which you can install as an individual on your own machine and get kind of the cloud native or a private cloud. Now, in this picture, I have two deployments, and this goes back to that multi-tenancy aspect. Deployment A here might be a deployment for public websites, whereas deployment B might be for your intranet or your development projects. Whenever you deploy a project, it creates 2 VMs per project. One is for www, which is where your ghost instance would be. And then the next one is for your BTC Pay server, which does all of the Bitcoin related stuff. Interestingly, I use Mac VLAN, which allows you to spin up a VM and have that VM attach to the underlying network and get a unique IP address on the network. So every VM has a unique IP address. And because of that, for each VM, you need to specify DHCP reservations and DNS records. So let me preface this also. I think this is more like a small to medium-sized business application or enterprise. You do need some technical knowledge on how to do this. So back to Parker's thing, he probably didn't want to deal with a lot of that. But I kind of view this as something you pass on to your IT department, they read, and then they can deploy your websites. Are there any questions on the deployment aspect here? Yeah.
Question about, so you mentioned each device gets its own IP. The idea you're kind of like protecting against surveillance, not only like out from the clear net into your network, but from the ISP?
So in terms of the Mac VLAN and them getting their own IP address, it's mostly for separation of services, so that if you do have multiple deployments, you can direct users to the correct service. With regard to like protecting your network, you would rely probably on your firewall and access control list for that kind of thing. So, okay. Now, I have a slide here on the data plane, and this is just more of a technical aspect of how everything gets deployed once the Docker containers are running and everything. But the traffic comes in, it hits this Mac VLAN IP address here, and then all of the traffic gets routed to Nginx, and the Nginx server will route the request to the appropriate container. Okay. Oops. Okay, so some of the technologies we're using: SSH, LXD, which as I mentioned is for spinning up your own private cloud, ZFS as a storage file system. All VMs are based on Ubuntu 22.04, and so also the Docker images, and I use the Docker API also for managing those remote VMs that get spun up. Okay, so let's look at some example websites, and if you're following along on sovereignstack.org, I'll just go ahead and bring those up, if I may. I'm not sure how to use a Mac exactly, so how do you open Chrome? Oh, here we go. Okay. So the first website is oldcitybitcoiners.info. Oops. Now Bitcoin, that's right. Okay, so this is a website that I made for the meetup in St. Augustine. St. Augustine is known as the Old City. And so this is just Ghost you're looking at here, but every single website is structured this way. You have a post here, and this one is rather short because I've been working on all of this stuff. But at the bottom of every post here, you can see there's a monthly crowdfunding link and a donation widget. So this is just using BTC Pay server, and you can go in there and leave a donation to the meetup. So it's very, And then I'm using the crowdfunding feature of BTC Pay server also. Let me jump back over here. So Old City Bitcoiners, the first meetup was on August 6th, and we're going to have one on August 31st. It's a Lightning value for value only website, no shitcoins. We have lots of links here, and I'm going to skip over some of that. I think that's probably too much detail. So the next website is satoshi-spirits.dev, and this one, spirits. I am not used to this keyboard. This is an example website that I created to, whenever we organize our meetups, I would like to go to a bar or brewery and say, hey, would you accept payment? And this is what I show them typically. So this is just a very simple website here that uses BTC Pay server for their menu mechanism on their BTC Pay server. Let's see if it'll come up. Okay, so I think most people are familiar with that. Now, this battery is looking pretty low, but it's not charging, so I don't know if we need to worry about that. It's plugged in. Glad I noticed that. Okay, I described the order flow on the About page and all of that, so check out that website. It's pretty cool. The third one is sovereignstack.org itself. So I created the website, sovereignstack.org, and deployed that using the software I created. And so it has a similar tipping mechanism, the crowdfunding mechanism, and all of that. So it's a good example website for an open source project if you're trying to monetize it. And then lastly, the Farscapian.com, which I've mentioned. And there's one more, a new one called roygbiv.guide, which Damien will be covering next. And I would just like to mention that I have integrated all of that functionality into SovereignStack at this point. So if you are interested in using or deploying Bolt 12 prisms, you can use SovereignStack to get that functionality pretty quickly. All right, on the website I have some slides and articles regarding how to prepare your network and make it available to host your own websites. You know, with regard to the hosting question, my view is if you have like an intranet website, let's say PlebLab, wouldn't it be great if you have a server right there on your network that can respond to queries much faster rather than going out to the internet? I think, so in terms of performance, it's just a much better system, I think, for certain use cases. Now, I do have some slides in there about availability and scalability and how I address these things, so definitely check those out. Let's see. I cover some things regarding DHCP and DNS and how to configure all of that. How you would prepare a cluster host. You essentially wipe it, put Ubuntu server on there, minimal installation, and leave a large portion of the disk for your websites. Now, of course, I mentioned you can deploy multiple websites all on one deployment, and they're all efficiently organized so that, it seems pretty quick as far as I'm concerned. But if you're going to deploy a public website, SovereignStack uses Let's Encrypt, which means you have to have your DNS records correctly configured. So I have a blog post about how to do that. Now, with regard to the code lifecycle management, I have a few posts on how to get the code, how to verify the code, how to update the code, how to install the code. So I'm not going to go into the details there, but I do have posts on that to make it pretty easy for people. Now, when you're using SovereignStack to create your websites, you are using like a laptop like this that can run VMs. And when you install SovereignStack on your management machine, it creates a VM, and that VM has everything it needs to manage remote cluster hosts. So that's nice because you can remove SovereignStack from your management machine, and it doesn't leave a bunch of crap lying around. It just deletes the VM, and that's that. And so that's, I think, a nice aspect of it. Once you're on your management machine and you have it installed, you can type in ssmanage, and that'll bump you into the environment, the management environment. And then from there, you can reach out to remote cluster hosts, okay? And here's what the SSME looks like. I've got some command line interface posts up there that describe those particular types of commands. But the API is pretty simple. Manage, help, show. Remote is what you would run when you're taking a new cluster endpoint under management. SS up would bring up your websites. SS down takes everything down. And SS reset removes everything from a remote cluster point endpoint. And just a quick couple of slides on what the user interface, it's all command line and editing text files. There's no like GUI for this. But it's pretty simple. I've got some scripts that will stub out all of your configuration files and stop when it does. You go and update them. And so an example here would be your deployment string. Let's say I wanted a public instance running mainnet and an intranet running regtest. I could do that all on the same hardware. I've got several command line options here. Here's the project.conf with regard, this is where you would define your MAC addresses that get assigned to the VMs so that they get the right IP address on your network underlay. And you can specify how many CPUs and how much memory is allocated to each VM. Okay, and I'm getting pretty close. Here's your site.conf. So you would specify, I want to deploy Ghost, I want Clams, I want Gitty. Clams is a Lightning wallet for Core Lightning. And I do support multiple languages too. I've had one website, my Panamanian lawyer who wanted a website. So I created one for her and she had Spanish, so I could do that. I've listed some useful commands here for you. And I'm getting the 2-minute mark, so some roadmap items here. I want to implement continuous security assessments. I'm going to deprecate Nextcloud and Gitty in lieu of some Nostr-based alternative. I would like to be able to preload chain state so that your nodes don't have to revalidate. And I'm trying to get everything running in rootless mode under Docker-D for more security. And I'm also trying to implement what are called system containers. And the last slide I have here, some startup ideas. So if someone was inclined to use this, you could create a business or two around it, I think. So I think the business model ultimately depends on whether you're doing custodial or non-custodial, or self-custodial, I should say. Individuals, so anyone here could learn the software and create websites for businesses. That's one business model. A startup that does this for people and cranks out these websites would be a good one. A startup that provides professional services, integrations, these types of things, all I think would be good. And then finally, a startup that packages the firewall, the switch, the cluster hosts, all of that into like a box that you can buy and plug in. I think that would be a good business model also. Because we want to encourage self-custody. And that in Lightning, I think that means running your own node. Okay, so if you want to get involved, just go to sovereignstack.org/contribute. We have the Nostr identity up there, and we have a Telegram chat, which I'm not thrilled with Telegram, but everyone's on there. So, and that's all I have. Are there any questions? I know that's kind of a lot to take in. I didn't have a lot of time, but at the end of the day, it allows you to just spin up websites on a remote machine on your network. And each of these websites has a Bitcoin node, BTC Pay server. And you can do all of the integrations and create websites like this. Yep.
So in the example where, and I actually might want to use this because I want to spin up a Ghost site soon and would want to have tipping and stuff like this. When I go through that process, is it kind of spinning up like a Ghost template with like the BTC Pay server kind of already set up, of course, once the node syncs?
Yeah, so I mean, yes, the answer is yes to that. So you get a blank Ghost website. So if you were to buy a project, it's just like, okay, here's your Ghost website, pick a template, create your website. But everything, so BTC Pay Server is integrated in the sense that it's situated behind an Nginx server. It's on a different VM. It does upgrades and not downgrades, but essentially everything is pre-configured so that they work well together and they're quick.
Okay. And can I like take that Ghost template, add it as a Git repo, and like do a kind of like deployment?
Yeah. So
Like
I
that,
would.
or do I need to like deploy on the server as well?
Yeah, so I think Ghost is probably not a good solution for that because it's a database solution. So you deploy it, you go in there and you use the user interface, and it's updating its internal SQL database.
I see.
So if you wanted to do that, I think it's something we could do. We just have to integrate some other solution and automated and continuous deployment.
Yeah.
So all of this right now is all manual. You use the command line interface. But I think at a certain point we could make it all automated. Yeah. Any other questions?